Hi, this is Lindsay, one of the co-hosts of Beauties and Headcanons. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media.
Disarming Disability.
Hi, I'm Nicole Kelly, and I'm a speaker and an activist.
And hi, I'm Sarah Tuberty. I'm an occupational therapy student, a flight attendant, and an aerial artist.
We both live with a disability. We both were born with a congenital limb difference and are hosts of a new podcast, Disarming Disability, coming to you on Public House Media.
So come, learn, explore, and understand disability so we can deconstruct these social stigmas and really build a more inclusive society.
Subscribe on Apple Podcasts or at publichousemedia.org. Come hang out with us every Wednesday. Also follow us on Twitter at DisarmDisable, Instagram and Facebook at Disarming Disability, and check out our website at disarmingdisability.com.
Bye!
Hello and welcome to your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. My name is Bryce Burge.
And I'm Ivan Sanchez Carrasco. Bryce, we're going to cover the second part of the Champions League. We have drama at Chelsea, and then we're going to talk a little bit about the MLS starting off, and then the She Believes Cup as well kicking off.
Lots of things to talk about on this episode. Let's start off with the Champions League just because we did such a good job of covering them last week. I want to continue that this week just because there were a number of events, namely in the Wednesday games between Atletico and Juventus as well as Man City versus Schalke. The problem is that even with that setup, there were two games that were left scoreless, namely Lyon and Barcelona and Liverpool and Bayern Munich. And so it's an interesting lineup the way that these have gone, but I think it'd be best to start off with the more exciting matchup, which I think was the most surprising one out of the group. Manchester City squeaking out a 3-2 victory literally at the last possible second, despite being a man down, winning 3-2 against Schalke. The game-winning goal came in the 90th minute. The equalizer came in the 85th minute. Both of these happened after Otamendi was sent off with a red card. So, obviously a really dramatic match. What was your thoughts on this?
I thought Schalke played it the best game they could until, they didn't, with Sane scoring a free kick in the 87th minute to tie it up against his former team. Didn't celebrate, just held up his hands, and then this long ball from Emerson that gets past the Schalke defense, and Sterling's able to cap it off. I mean, it kind of seemed like that City were kind of going through the motions a bit in the first half. Schalke came out with everything, got 2 PK goals, both assisted by VAR that helped them set up with this. And I thought if Schalke did take away, we were able to close out a 2-1 victory. The second leg being back at City, I think still made City's favorites, but now it kind of cemented that with that 3-2 win away.
Yeah, but I think the other thing about that too is that this has been a real down year for Schalke, and so at least since the Bundesliga has started, and for them to go out there and to play a third of this game with a man advantage and still get tripled up on shots on goal, doubled up in possession, double up in passes. Pretty much every statistical category there's a multiplier on by Man City over Schalke, and that is just such a big deal to me because I look at this and I see opportunities and I see chances, and I don't see much from the defense here, despite having the best possible scenario for them, and it just showed that Man City is a team that can still grind out victories. They haven't had to do that a whole lot. They haven't had to come from behind a lot so far this last calendar year or so. But it is a unique situation to see Man City get that kind of game back involved in such a high level league, because it's something that they haven't had to do.
Yeah, and it just kind of showed that they're able to, the quality they have and the talent they have, and how they're able to turn it on against teams that might not be up to their level. If they played like this against probably one of the stronger teams in Europe, they would be entering the second leg down. But it just kind of showed the quality overall that Chelsea have, or City have, and how they're able to turn it on. And it just kind of shows how shocked the struggle to close out games and the way they've been and the struggle they've been on all year.
Let's jump to the other game that had a more defined result. That's Atletico Madrid versus Juventus, a 2-0 victory for the Spanish side. Jimenez in the 78th minute, Godin in the 83rd, bringing home the goals for Atletico Madrid. This one was statistically a lot more, straightforward. It's the kind of, maybe not the result that we were expecting, but it was more the back and forth kind of understanding what these two clubs can do kind of game. That really kind of went more with their stereotypes that they bring to the table. What did you think about this matchup?
Yeah, I thought Atletico played this exactly how they wanted to and how they should have. They almost, I almost thought that Juve overthought this first leg because they were so wary of Atletico's style and their defined way of playing that it kind of just fell right into Atletico's hands, where they were able to keep Juve at bay and get 2 goals off set pieces. And now Juve is in a big problem entering that second leg. They have to go out and score, and it kind of opens up more into what Atletico is going to try to do in the second leg and hit them on the counter. It was Juve got out coached, I think, and they got out. And Atletico just played with a little. They knew exactly what they wanted to do, and they were more comfortable doing it. And I think Juve kind of got in their own heads, trying to give Atletico a little more of the ball and try to sit back a little more when. They just they need to go out and attack more, I think. And now they're going to need to do that, especially in the second leg, to try to save this tie. And it just falls more into Atletico's hands, where I think Atletico just we're more comfortable with their game plan entering this first leg and are going to be even more comfortable knowing exactly what they want to do entering the second leg.
With that, second legs are coming up in early March. We will be able to talk about that in the future as we look forward to getting the second leg of the Champions League involved in this round of 16. Let's bounce around a little bit to another team that's been involved in another big cup, as Chelsea. Chelsea had some issues here the other day, and it's an interesting situation in the Carabao Cup Finals against, again, Man City, because of the goalie. Break down the situation for us.
So Chelsea and City are in the Carlton Cup Finals. It's 0-0 entering the 119th minute, so the last minute of extra time. And throughout the extra time, Kepa, I'm not going to try to pronounce his last name, the Chelsea goalkeeper, went down a couple times. The training staff said it was cramps, this and that. With about a minute left, Chelsea were going to use the final sub on him and bring in Caballero, who's known as being a good quality PK stopper, and he was at the half line ready to come in, and Kepa essentially waved the sub off and refused to come off. And Seri and him got into a pretty heated exchange from the field to the half. You saw Seri throw the bottle down. It almost looked like he was going to walk off the field down the tunnel as well, and Kepa essentially stayed on and refused to come off. And then Chelsea went on to lose in PKs. He blocked one. Another one kind of went through his hands, one that you would maybe expect him to save. But, yeah, I don't know. I've never seen this in soccer where a player refuses to come off. I've seen where a player comes off and is angry and refuses to acknowledge the coach, but I've never seen someone just defiantly refuse to come off on from a game.
Now, the thing is about this is that, you have that scenario, and I've seen plenty of angry people, but very, very rarely do you see a goalkeeper sub unless there's an injury involved. Even in hockey, though, like where you pull a goaltender all the time because, some guy lets in 6 goals on 12 shots, that's one thing. But, like, even in soccer, it is still fairly rare to see that setup, even with the circumstances described about having, penalty kicks set up. it is unique. So like how much of that about having a player refuse is the goalie, upset about being pulled personally as a goalie, or is it just upset that there's other things going on?
So it has happened before in the past where a keeper will be subbed off at the last minute because the other keeper is known for his ability to stop PKs. And I'm assuming this is something that was spoken to in the game plan. If that is a possibility, if this happens and this happens, the keeper could be subbed off if we still have a sub left. So that's not completely uncommon. It is, as a keeper, I would say I would be furious if I got pulled off for the other keeper for the PKs. It's just so rare because I didn't know that was an option. If I knew that was an option that I could just wave off a sub, I would have done it plenty of times too in the past. But it just kind of shows to how kind of everything's fallen off the hinges at Chelsea. We talked about it a little bit a couple weeks ago, but this is like a whole new level where a guy openly just has completely ignored the manager's orders. And I think that just kind of shows where Chelsea's at as a club right now, how they've started off high and now everything's kind of falling off. The wheels are falling off. And what do you do now? Do you bench him? Do you pretend nothing's happened? I think they said after the game that it was a miscommunication, that Sari thought that Kepa was cramping, this and that. And yeah, it just kind of just shows where this club's at. I think it's just an overall example of how Chelsea's just kind of falling off the rails a bit.
Well, falling off the rails, I think, is a polite way of handling it. I mean, when you look at Chelsea so far, they've really struggled, namely by just how bad their results have been recently. I think it was last week where they lost 6-0 in this matchup anyway. So
yeah.
So I mean, obviously the fact if you're going to PKs, you're already miles ahead, at least on the pitch, of what just happened. But that kind of game pre-planning is so big. For me, when I've seen other sports, and I've talked football more than I've talked anything else in my commentary career, when hearing things like people like Aaron Rodgers going in there and changing plays in the huddle just because he had no respect for Mike McCarthy anymore in Green Bay, then that's almost a very similar situation to me, because you can't do much in soccer compared to that spot of changing out those roles. But people are starting to figure out that Sarri is not doing well. He does not have a single aspect of control of that locker room, and it is an absolute failure on his part to have everything blow up this badly in his face. It's frustrating, but eventually this stuff's going to continue because you don't have a guy. I mean, the backup, Caballero is. I mean, he's played with Man City before. He has records there. He has a good penalty record, maybe not as good as Arrizabalaga, but it's not necessarily the worst case scenario to swap him out for the strategic aspects of it all. It's all about right now just not having any control in Chelsea. It is complete anarchy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it is, I think. And I think it was Company, the City captain, who said they were happy that Kappa stayed and that Caballero didn't go in. For that same reason, they played with Caballero. He's won them PK shootouts in the past for City, so they have an idea of it too. And yeah, it's just incredible to see a club just, I guess a mutiny would be the word that's going around a lot about the situation, about how just a player openly just ignored the order of a coach. And yeah, it's going to be, if Sarri can even last through the end of the season, I think at this point is the question, because if he can't control a sub, how's he controlling that? What are training sessions looking like? What are video sessions looking like? What all those little things that we don't see throughout the week? How are what's really going on in those situations that has led to this too?
Honestly, I mean, I'm still kind of speechless with this whole scenario. I didn't think that an EPL team could do this.
I mean, you have to suspend him.
Well, they're saying that they're going to punish him. I believe that it was a fine. that came through, but they like official statements came out, all that other kind of stuff, but it's nothing over the top. It's not necessarily as established as it could be. So I don't know. Even if, what is a fitting punishment? We got a minute left here in this segment. What is a fitting punishment for this?
Well, I think you have to put your foot down and you have to suspend him a couple games or something of that manner. You can't just fine him, because what does that say to the rest of these players, especially more experienced players? Because there's only he's a young keeper, 25, and if he's stepping out of bounds like this, what does that say to the older guys as well? And also, where's the captains? Where are the Chelsea captains in all this too? That's the other question.
All right, we'll take a break here on Your Soccer Passport. Obviously, we'll have to mull over this Chelsea situation. We'll follow that more. I mean, definitely more storylines coming out of the EPL. Just because Manchester United got their act together doesn't mean that somebody's not going to create the drama. So plenty to talk about here on Your Soccer Passport. We'll take a break. When we return, we'll head more domestically, talk about the U.S. Women's National Team, as well as the MLS preview coming up. You're listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media.
This is John Lauder, host of The Cheap Seats here on Public House Media. Thanks for listening to the following broadcast on Public House Media. Once you're done with this episode, I hope you'll come check out my show, The Cheap Seats, where we talk about sports from the fans' perspective. A new show comes out every Monday. Don't forget to subscribe on iTunes so you never miss an episode of The Cheap Seats. Thanks again for checking out the following broadcast on Public House Media.
And welcome back to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media. Just remember that in case you want to help out Your Soccer Passport or any of the other shows on Public House Media, you can check out our merchandise shop on TeePublic. You can get t-shirts, mugs, wall art, and more, all available in the TeePublic shop. Visit teepublic.com/pubhousemedia. That's teepublic.com. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the She Believes Cup. It's another international friendly tournament left between one representative of three different regional bodies. It's the United States, Japan, England, and Brazil. That kicks off on day of broadcast now on Wednesdays here on Public House Media. Starting off with England and Brazil at 4 p.m. Eastern. United States and Japan face off at 7 p.m. Eastern time as well. Let's talk about this a little bit. Who do you got? Let's take some winners here because of the way that the tournament's set up. Basically, everybody plays each other once. That extended round robin per se, winner take all. It's very close to the League of Nations Championship Cup that has had teams like Australia and the United States in it before too. So let's take a look at this. Who do you think will take the overall title at this tournament?
I'll give it to USA just because they're hosting it and they've won two of the three editions that they've had.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much it. I mean, Japan, I think, could do something with it. England, I think, has had a little bit of a bigger struggle this offseason leading up to the World Cup. They had some really good qualifiers, but the English national team has looked really just dead. They've been a complete dud in terms of some of their friendlies that they've had. So, I'm not sure if this extra push, given everything, is enough to put them over the edge. But it's still just kind of like one of those things where it's like, all right, well, England's kind of blah. They're not adding enough spice to their fish and chips, and it's just nothing. So, I mean, and Brazil's in the same boat too. I don't know if Brazil has got the depth per se to win a tournament like this where every game directly impacts the overall score. But
I've learned to never trust Brazil in women's soccer. Anytime they have expectations, I always feel they underachieve. I think they might be either the most underachieving women's national team or most overrated women's national team in my lifetime for the way we talk about them, and then they never deliver. So I've kind of given up hope on Brazil.
I mean, I think the question about whether you have hope in the Brazilian national team is based on are they the most underachieving or are they the most overrated? Underachieving means that there's reason to have hope. Overrated means that they're just over embellished because there's not another team from South America that can really be worth a darn on the international level. I mean, most of the South American women's teams couldn't hold a candle in standard women's qualifications in Europe or Asia. So, I mean, to see that come about, it is a little frustrating. But, I mean, I think there's reasons to have hope. I think they're underachieving in that regard. But, yeah, not in this tournament. It's it's either U.S. or Japan.
Yeah, I just feel with Brazil, every time the bright lights are on and they're up, they just tend to wilt. So until they prove me wrong, I'm gonna not have any hope for Brazil.
Fair enough. When I look at this Brazilian team, they've got some pieces obviously, and you can't disrespect the Martas of the world. But when I look at a tournament like this, where you look at how deep Japan is and how deep the United States is, it definitely changes the aspect of it. The problem is that your favorites are facing off the first game. And so there's no drama that happens in a tournament like this. And so let's talk about a little bit about tournament format. This is a style of tournament that you see in women's soccer, but you don't see in men's soccer. And not even like the big levels compared to the small levels. You don't see tournaments like this in terms of like regional round robins that you might have in like Oceania, where there's islands that may be 25 square miles big and only have 100,000 people on it. That's where a tournament like that could maybe work on the men's side. But for the women's side, this is the pinnacle. Like how important really is a tournament like this?
It's important in the way that it's giving these teams competitive matches entering a World Cup year. The reality is this tournament is essentially glorified friendlies. But the geniuses at U.S. Soccer have found a way to slap a name on this and call it a tournament and be able to charge a little extra money and make it seem more important. So shout out to U.S. Soccer for always having the dollar bills at the forefront of all this. But yeah, essentially these are glorified friendlies but these are important for all these teams as they enter the World Cup year. So the 2017 She Believes Cup is not as important as this one for those same reasons. But I think that these are more just glorified friendlies that they call the tournament so they can charge people more money. And so smart on U.S. Soccer and good for them to find a way to get these friendlies that are important entering a World Cup year.
If the U.S. Soccer was really smart, they'd let Canada play it. Because when I see this and I see the injury risks that have happened and the fact that people are just now getting back in playing shape and overcoming their injuries, this is not the time. I know it's March. I know that's the end of February, beginning of March. The games are played the 27th, the 2nd, and the 5th, and that's it. There's only 3 important friendlies there. But when I look at this scenario and I see, hey, you know what? The U.S. doesn't have to be here. Japan doesn't have to be there. You could throw in a team like New Zealand. You could throw in a team like Canada, and you could still see them struggle and falter when they get to an international stage in France, where the United States could probably use that time to solidify their own health and then move forward.
No, you can't do that because the selling point of all this tournament is the U.S. because they're the ones who host it. You have to have them. If not, no one's going to watch these games.
I realize that. But that's the difference between the deal with women's soccer right now is: are you going after the dollars or are you going after the hardware? If the United States
they're going after the dollars.
Then why have it? It's not worth it. You're gonna pass up everything that you have heading into the World Cup if Rapinoe re-injures herself, or if Carly Lloyd re-injures herself, or if somebody goes out there and gets an elbow to the face against Japan, or Brazil doesn't have the depth and some young player trying to make a name for themselves takes out somebody's ACL. That's 100% what could happen, and especially for a team like England. I could see England doing it because they're in a rough spot. They need something to break the monotony going on. But this is just a cash grab. It's not anything that's important in anything. There's no understanding whatsoever of why this would be a good idea in the long term for the United States. Even if they're just hosting it, whatever, or it's all even if it's all B team players, people getting their first, reps at this level.
The only argument is that you're 3 months away from the World Cup, and you can't get too many. You can't fit too many friendlies in before term starts. So that's the only argument for it. But I mean, yeah, it's essentially more a cash grab, and that's why this is the fourth installment. That's why they've had it every year, is for that same reason, so they can put a name on it and make money. But yeah, that's essentially what it is in the long run. And then you hope to get some good friendlies out of it. You hope to continue to learn more about your team entering the World Cup, and you hope to build momentum. That's kind of the second part. That's the second part, and that's the argument for it too, from a sporting standpoint.
All right. Well, we will disagree on that one. We've had a couple of disagreements on the show. That's fine. I'm fine to disagree on that one. Let's make sure that we got enough time to talk about this, because also starting up this weekend is the MLS. Not a hardcore preview per se of the MLS season preview, more of a recap scenario. I believe next week is what we'll go with. So let's just kind of go off of a basic thought process, very basic scenario. Who do you think is going to be the most improved team from last season to this season?
Most improved? I think I'm going to go with Philadelphia Union. I mean, they were pretty good last year, but they brought in Fabian, Mexican international from Germany. I think if he settles in well, he can bring that extra spark that I think was missing from the Union and kind of push them to the next level up there with in the East. So I'll go with the Union from the East. And then from the West, I think Minnesota is going to take a next level up. They're getting a new stadium at home, a new soccer-specific stadium. I think that will help as well. And as they continue to settle, I think it'll be a tough place to play.
Well, I picked Minnesota United. I think that they've done some good stuff with their allocation money too, to really kind of fill in holes. So what they've got going on with that, I think, is probably their best spot. So I'll pick my most improved team to be Minnesota United. Let's go with most disappointing team. Who do you think is going to be the saddest team for us as fans and pundits to watch this season?
I don't know if they'll be the saddest, but I think a team to watch who will continue to disappoint is going to be LA Galaxy. I think they're kind of stuck in this middle of they want to, number one, they have to compete now with LAFC, who are doing everything right, and now you have LA Galaxy, who are kind of in the middle. They don't know if they want to bring in youth players and build them up, while you also have these big name players as well. They've been trying to get out of Giovanni Dos Santos' contract, and the man's not stupid. He gets paid a lot of money, and he does not do a lot, and he is not willing to give that up just to help the LA Galaxy. So I think the LA Galaxy is going to be the one to watch when it comes to a disappointment for what you actually expect for them to be in when you think about the MLS as a whole.
I'm going to go with Toronto. Toronto kind of gotten too big. Like they had such a big year 2 years ago, and then last year really struggled along. But Toronto is real hit or miss in terms of being a sports-friendly city. They brought in a couple of decent signings, but they're not in really any role that's going to help them either short-term or long-term. They're just adding depth to the few positions that they did well. So they haven't made any changes enough to really be an exciting group. Toronto, I think, is going to be one of the three worst teams in the East this year. Especially after just how bad they got blown up in Champions League. I think it was 4-0 in that first leg. So it is an absolute disgusting scenario for them when they move forward. And they haven't had anything go well for them since the Canadian Championship, and that was only because they lucked out with facing Ottawa City in the opening round, or in the semifinals per se. So they're not doing too hot right now. I think that they're going to be the worst going into it. Let's continue with one more prediction, just good or bad, 30 seconds. How do you think FC Cincinnati is going to do this year?
I think they'll be kind of in the middle of the pack, middle lower. I think it helps that they're in the East. I think just because I think the East has been pretty top heavy, and then the middle kind of gets. It's not as deep as the West was last year. I think it's going to be something similar. So I think you can kind of find them in that 6, 7, 8 range. So I'll go that with Cincinnati.
I think that's fair. I mean, the question is how well are teams like Orlando City or Montreal kind of rebound after last year, or whether DC United will stay hot like they did at the end of the year. It all depends. And so Cincinnati with a mediocre season could find themselves, knocking on a playoff berth just because of that inconsistency we see out east. And 30 seconds again, who do you think wins it all?
Early predictions, I'll go LAFC. I think they kind of established themselves pretty nicely. They don't have a dramatic coaching change like in Atlanta. They don't have the stink on them like New York Red Bulls. And I think they can take that next step. Them or also Kansas City. I think Kansas City too. Kansas City's really nice too. Those are my two.
I'm gonna pick Kansas City. I'm gonna say DC United's gonna make it out of the East though, just because I think that they are gonna continue enough with what they did at the end of the last season. I think that even with the shock value of where they kind of just immediately rolled through the East once they got Rooney, I think that they did enough to kind of find where the right pieces were, and they added depth to allow them to put people in their truly best position. So I think DC United's going to win the East. So I don't know if they'll win the Shield, but they'll win the East per se in terms of making it to the finals. So that's going to wrap it up for this week's show. It is enough, and unfortunately we don't have enough time for the shout out just because we are at 7 seconds. So have a good one, everybody. Thanks for listening to Your Soccer Passport here on Public House Media.